Welcome and thank you for joining us for Chapter 1 of this three-part webinar series, Solving the Plastic Pollution Crisis Through Hotspotting, an introduction to the UNEP IUCN National Guidance for Plastic Pollution Hotspotting and Shaping Action. The guidance is co-developed by the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and the Life Cycle Initiative with technical implementation by EA Qantas. The guidance takes a holistic approach, covering major types of plastic polymers and products, as well as their leakages and impacts along the full value chain. The primary users of the guidance are governments. They can use the results of the analysis to design, plan, and implement policy instruments and actions to reduce plastic pollution. The guidance is designed to be used primarily at national level, but the approach can be adapted to accommodate policy makers at sub-national and local levels. Stakeholders from the private sector, academia, and NGOs can support the application of the guidance and benefit from the results as well. Chapter 1 will cover the guidance, its purpose, and explain the tools and modules to be used in the performance of national plastic pollution hotspotting analysis. At the end of this chapter, we will share with you the website where you may download the guidance tools and modules. Chapter 2 will cover country examples from Kenya and Thailand, and Chapter 3 will cover policy and business.
I will give a very short look back of the history of this project and the reason why we're doing that, and then I will hand over to colleagues to give you more details. So actually this project or the work dated back around 2.5 years ago, when UNEP was thinking how do we better support our member states and countries to understand on the plastic pollution, both on the status but also the cause of it. So at that time there were not so many, let's say, tools or methodology to measure and understand better the plastic value chain and also the source of the problem. Especially we haven't seen a kind of harmonized methodology for making the calculation and doing the assessment. So this was the original idea, to develop this guidance to support country to better measure their plastic pollution and also develop solution. Luckily, we were able to formulate a very strong partnership with IUCN to implement this idea with the support from a couple of key donors. So today we are very excited to share the result with you after 2 years of development. Essentially, the goal of our intervention is to develop a harmonized methodology framework to support countries and also cities to understand better the key hotspot related to plastic pollution, and also based on the assessment of hotspots, how can we support different stakeholders and also the government to define interventions, and also what are the concrete instruments we can apply actually to deal with the pollution. As you can see that from the very beginning that our goal was to support government to develop policy in the intervention as well as action from the private sector, so that we wanted to develop something that's very practical and also can be applied by countries and for supporting the decision-making process. So there are three key, let's say, products of our guidance. One, the blue publication you might have seen is a high-level comprehensive methodology introduction of the key components and also the way how we're dealing with this problem. There are also a set of modules presented in PowerPoint showing the concrete calculation steps and also formulas and also detailed modeling approaches. Most importantly, we also develop a set of tools that's comprised of different Excel database or Excel sheet to facilitate data collection, assessment, and also generating results. So we're happy to announce today that all the three different type of output from the project have been finally published on our website, and please click on the link. We'll be also sharing in the chat box for the product. I would like to spend a very short time to explain what do we mean by hotspot, as there is no common definition agreement on that. But our understanding of hotspot is either the product, polymer, or the process or even the location causing the plastic leakage, and also associated impact, so that we can understand where are the key areas we can act upon to mitigate the impact. So this is what we mean here by hotspot. This graph simply shows in the kind of a very visual way in terms of hotspot, what we mean is actually the source of the problem, mainly caused by the production and consumption of plastic products by product categories, polymers, or different application in different sectors. At the same time, the system that's in the country and the city that dealing with the plastic product waste and pollution. At the same time, what are the actual impact to the environment and human health? So in this way, that we are able to map the whole system throughout the life cycle of the plastic product, and also find out the key areas of intervention. So this is a little bit background on the way how we measure things. And as I said, that the guidance is not only a theoretical report or methodology, it is actually being applied in many countries, so that we can also get a fresh learning experience by using that. So having said that, now I think it's perfect timing for me to hand over to my colleague Jenica in IUCN, who has applied the guidance in a couple of countries with very good results. So that I think it's now a good bridge for Jenica to step up to tell us more about the pilot that IUCN has been organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fan, for that introduction. What I would like to stress, IUCN's Close the Plastic Tap was started around 2014. And one of the things we've recognized in identifying solutions is that there is a need for harmonized methods for addressing plastic waste and leakage. And this is really where our collaboration with UNEP and QuantiCA really stems from. The value in particular of the guidance and its current structure comes from actually some early work that IUCN had done with QuantiCA in the initial phases. So this we saw as a natural progressive evolution of what had started many years ago. More specifically, as it relates to the guidance, I think what IUCN has been able to bring to the table is a set of experiences in applying it. And by applying the guidance, we've actually learned and been able to adapt and modify it to meet the needs of what we see as a vast group of stakeholders. And to give you a very simple idea, this product has been tested in 3 continents, 6 countries, and 1 sub-region, ranging from one end, South Africa and Thailand, which are considered very relatively well-developed economies, to the other end of the spectrum. So the experiences that we've gathered actually, I think, have enriched the product as you currently see it. And we anticipate with further testing, this will improve even further. A second factor that comes out of our testing is really the approach of applying the hotspot analysis. And we've actually had the opportunity of actually using what I would say are 3 different mechanisms for dealing or applying it. One, in a situation where it was pretty much applied as a first basis of a quick analysis. 2, applied in conjunction with partners with a less hands-off approach. And thirdly, which I will show you in this current slide, is through our marine plastics and coastal communities project in a more holistic way. And I think this is what we might say is the very valuable tool. The basis of this is really through setting up multi-stakeholder platforms that bring together different stakeholders to buy into this information right from the point of which when it's produced, analyzed, and then into the decision-making process. So the knowledge and information that comes out of the generation of the hotspot analysis is really critical and important to influence these other components. And those 3 other components that we've been working on relate to 3 main areas. First, obviously, in terms of informing national policy and actions in terms of areas of interventions that make sense. And particularly, as you will hear later on from Julian and his team, there's a whole component that helps identify potential instruments and interventions that can actually inform that decision-making process. But it is also coupled with more detailed information, as you'll hear from the case studies later on from Thailand, Vietnam, and our policy components, which actually brings together the legal and policy analysis to complement this work. So it's a part of a larger package. Also included in that component is really making the economic case for action. Because ultimately, while you can identify these issues, you can see how to solve the problem, it has to make economic sense for it to be actually implemented. So coupled with all of this information, we think that this is an approach to actually deal with the larger issues of addressing plastic leakage and waste. More importantly, it's also important to make sure that we engage with all our different stakeholders, and particularly the private sector or businesses, as you will hear later on, are extremely important in terms of using this information to make decisions and to be engaged in taking actions. And then finally, what is extremely important, and I think our first session this morning highlighted quite clearly, is that there is a need to build capacity and methods to be harmonized. And so capacity development is an extremely important component of all of this work. And that works in a number of different ways. One, in terms of actually embedding this methodology among stakeholders and integrating it into national systems, but also engaging with different parts of stakeholders, particularly communities and locally based organizations that quite often are doing substantial work in addressing the issues of plastic waste and leakage, but are not often recognized for their role in terms of what it is in terms of the circular economy. So to very succinctly put, and I hope some of this will come out later on when we discuss the case studies that we have, we see this as part of an overall package that can be used at a national level, at its level. But that does not preclude one from actually applying it in a more restricted form, either as a baseline startup or some intermediary process. And this, I think, is the value and utility of this methodology, that it can be applied. Finally, just to very quickly say is that as we've applied the methodology and learned through this whole process, we've had a large number of spin-off outcomes. And these have related to actually contributing and taking action on specific actions, as you'll hear later on, in terms of, for example, supporting at least 2 of the countries to engage in discussions around extended producer responsibility. And more importantly, what has also happened out of this process is the sharing of information and data amongst other projects at different scales and levels. And this has already happened in 3 different countries on 3 different projects. So we see this integrated process really as the way forward in actually ensuring that A, we have a harmonized methodology, and B, that we actually involve all the relevant stakeholders in the decision and process of getting comfortable and using this information. So with that very brief overview of how we have at IUCN applied this product and tool, I would like to hand it over to Julian, maybe just now start giving you a little bit more of what you actually get when you use it, and then later on. So with that, maybe I'll pass it on to Julian. Thank you.
Thank you, Janaka. Hello, everyone. So my name is Julien Boucher. I am the founder and director of EA, Environmental Action. We are a research consultancy based in Switzerland, and together with Quantis, we have been doing most of the technical work of developing and piloting the guidance for UNEP and IUCN. And my presentation now will try to give you a sense of what you get when applying this guidance. First thing you get is a baseline. And what we mean by that is an assessment of the magnitude of the main plastic flows in your country, an assessment of what are the key waste management metrics in your country, and of course, what is the magnitude of the plastic leakage in your country. So this baseline is based on modeling to reconcile very many different data from many sources, often conflicting data. As an example of output, you can see on the graph here the plastic mass balance for one country. In the input, you have the domestic plastic production, the import of primary plastics, import of products containing plastic, and the import of waste or plastic waste. As output, you have export of plastic waste in some cases, export of products, sometimes export of primary plastics, and a change in stock when you have long-lasting products that accumulate in the country. The rest is waste, with different types of management, some being mismanaged and eventually leaked in the environment and the ocean. So this coherent and standardized mass balance approach, coupled with modeling of the waste management, allows for benchmarking between countries and also benchmarking over time for your own country in order to monitor progress. In this baseline, we also have different focuses. One of them is the recycling situation in the country. And the guidance provides a framework to include imports and export of plastic, as well as the contribution of the formal and the informal sector in making the recycling picture. In this example, you can see that the recycling rate in the country is 13% in average, but this is mainly stemming from imported plastics. If you look at the recycling of domestically wasted plastic, it's only 1%. And this is typically the type of information or information gap that you want to have in mind when, as a company or as a country, you want to calculate on or mitigate your plastic footprint, for example. So another focus of the baseline is the assessment of the contribution of primary microplastics. In most countries, there were only a minor contribution to the total leakage, but it could be different in other countries with better waste management infrastructure. In this example from Thailand, you can see, for example, that the contribution of pellets ranks quite high, and this is different in other countries because Thailand is a large plastic producer with a lot of pellets handling and processing. So once the baseline is established, the second aspect of the guidance is to allow to identify hotspots. As previously stated, we have 5 categories of hotspots, and these 5 types of hotspots cover all the dimensions of the plastic value chain. We have the polymer hotspots, the application hotspots, the industry sector hotspots, the regional hotspots, and the waste management hotspots. So let's start with the 3 first, the polymer, application, and sector hotspots, because they are strongly interconnected, and these 3 are intended to answer the question, what is leaking in the country? So in the example on the slide before, the mass balance shown is applied to each of the polymer in a very granular way, showing in a way which polymer is leaking the most, which polymer is imported, produced, wasted, and leaked the most. You can see that we also have developed a scoring system. You can see on the top right a quality score, which goes along the modeling and allows to assess the data and the modeling quality throughout the process, thus pushing for continuous improvement and also to identify where we might have data gaps. So this is part of the guidance. So from these mass balances and leakage modeling, the hotspots are then defined for polymers as well as for applications and sectors. They are the polymers / applications / sectors leaking the most in the country. On this diagram, they are labeled in red. And these 3 information are very complementary because they speak to different target groups. For instance, polymer information is key to the waste management sector when setting strategies or deciding on investments. Application information is key more like to policymakers when they are prioritizing products for when thinking at ban, for example. The beauty of having these 3 types of hotspots is really that they are highly interconnected in the model. And for the technical eye, I think this is one of the value of the guidance. To illustrate that, for example, littering rates are very specific to applications. But in the model, we collect the data for the application, and then the information is transferred to the sector modeling in terms of the polymer modeling. The same, for example, the stock of plastics that is forming, this information is extracted from the sector modeling, like if it's plastic in the building industry, it will long laster, and then it's transferred to different applications and polymers to get a full and coherent picture. This really allows to reconcile these different types of data and get this coherent picture within the country and the plastic value chain. So after having answered this what is leaking question, comes the question, where is it leaking? And this part of the analysis is done by using open source GIS resources, so geographic information systems. And the guidance provide a very simple and clear workflow to overlay the different information that are needed, like waste generation rates within the country, collection rates within the country for different cities, provinces, etc., mismanagement rates within the country, as well as some geographic elements like the distance to shore and hydrological data. And all this, when overlaid, allows to yield a leakage map to highlight precisely where are the leakage hotspots within the country, for example, around big cities or along the rivers. And this is very useful to set priorities. Within the country, it allows to design some archetypes where you maybe can find or shape similar types of interventions and instruments. So last of the hotspot type, the waste management hotspot. And this one, it's a different question. It allows to answer the question, why is it leaking? It's very important when trying to shape action. This is done through a more qualitative approach. The matrix has different components of the waste management, and it allows to map which are the drivers and the preventers of the leakage in the country. And this visualization can be associated with the different geographical archetypes to show where we have similar patterns or where this is not the case. In this example, you can see that mostly only the cleanup activities are in green below on the graph, and the rest higher up on the plastic management chain is more in red. And of course, we should aim for higher up action in the plastic management system to mitigate leakage. So once all this technical analysis has been performed, the hotspot information is wrapped up in a much more cohesive and concise package, and we provide guidance on how to phrase actionable hotspots in sharp sentences, trying to replicate this logical what, where, why structure. We aim for around 15-20 of these sentences as an output, high-level output of the hotspotting analysis, and believe this is a good starting point to engage stakeholders in group discussion and shaping action. So once we have achieved all this technical work, we move to the more strategic part of the guidance, which is about shaping action. And the guidance proposes a two-step approach through interventions and instruments. Interventions are practical tools, practical solutions. In a way, it's the engineer perspective of the problem, and instruments are more a way how to implement these interventions and tools, and it's more like the policymaker or the manager viewpoint of the issue. So the guidance provides a framework to guide the process of converging toward these interventions and instruments. And also the guidance provides a by default list of these interventions and instruments. This avoids starting from a blank page and allows to capitalize on the best examples or business cases. So on the diagram on the right, you can see an example of extracted from the list of interventions with different categories and subcategories. It's of course much more complete in the tools that you can access. So for both interventions and instruments, we propose a prioritization scheme. For interventions, the prioritization is based on two criteria. the mitigation potential of the intervention and the potential unintended consequences. For example, if one intervention would yield a higher carbon footprint. Of course, we favor interventions with high mitigation potential and low unintended consequences. So similarly for instruments, we also have a prioritization system based on two criteria. One is the technical, economical feasibility of the instrument, and the other one is the potential for synergies between instruments or synergies with other instruments already in place in the country. Again, this allows to identify priority instruments associated with priority interventions in a sort of funneling system. Last but not least, one of the key outcomes of applying the guidance is to yield a clean data set for your country with key management, waste management metrics like collection rates or recycling rates per polymer type. And this is also key to monitor progress in the countries, as well as to funnel investments towards the most appropriate infrastructure or projects. For the private sector, this is also a very valuable information to feed all the plastic footprinting and eco-design projects and initiatives that take place. But now I leave the floor to Alexandre, who will explain how you can also get all this by applying the guidance.
Thank you very much, Julien, for sharing those insightful information on what we can get with this guidance. I am Alexandre Boucher from EA Consulting Group, behind the technical development of the guidance. Now let's see how we can use the guidance to get to those visual outputs and final results. So in order to get those results, the guidance offers a set of tools grouped into modules. Modules that are provided in a slide deck format are the instructions on how to use the tools and can be of two kinds. First, technical modules, which focus on generating plastic hotspot information, as we saw before, with bar charts and also maps, and that are more oriented toward people applying the guidance. And second, strategic modules, which focus on identifying the appropriate interventions and instruments based on the results you obtain through the technical modules. And those strategic modules are also open to other stakeholders, such as policymakers and economists. So each module comes with one or several tools. These tools are the building blocks of the guidance and are divided into three categories. One, input tools that are targeted at data collection with data libraries built from literature review and also data collection templates to guide interviews with relevant stakeholders to fill data gaps that you might have found in literature review. Two, assessment tools. They are used to generate the plastic pollution hotspots, as well as the fitting interventions and instruments to answer those hotspots in each country. And three, output tools used to generate graphs and support the user in drawing conclusion with summarized information. Overall, the guidance offers more than 20 tools spanning across 9 modules. And to make a long story short, this guidance workflow is partitioned into those compact packages, each focusing on specific topics to smoothly guide users toward generating a complete analysis on plastic pollution hotspots. Now, let's briefly see how a module looks like. So here on the right, you can see the cover page of one slide deck, which is module T3. And the next slide will feature several illustrations of this slide deck for T3. Each module provides a guided approach with a clear description of the workflow and detailed instructions on how to use the tools inside it. For instance, module slides includes logograms to channel users' efforts into a step-by-step approach and offer an overview of how tools interact with one another within the module. Tools are either in the form of Excel files, PowerPoint templates, or also GIS models, which means geographical information systems, that are used to draw the nice maps you've seen in the section What You Get, presented by Julien before. And those tools are intended to be as accessible as possible. For users interested in the workings of the project, slides with detailed explanation on how the model works are also available for you to understand it fully so that you can apply it yourself, as you can see on the screen.
Thank you for watching and following Chapter 1 of this 3-part webinar series, Solving the Plastic Pollution Crisis Through Hotspotting, an introduction to the UNEP IUCN National Guidance for Plastic Pollution, Hotspotting and Shaping Action. We would like to thank the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency and the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Norway, EA Quantis, the Life Cycle Initiative and the teams at IUCN and UNEP for making this work possible. To learn more and to download the guidance, tools and modules, please visit the Life Cycle Initiative website posted on the screen. Also, do not forget to visit the IUCN's Close the Plastic Tap programme website shown on screen to learn more about our initiatives in tackling plastic pollution.